So, we are going to continue the series of different kinds of methodologies that a penetration tester could possibly make use of for doing a web attack in this module. So, in the last module we had actually seen a mechanism by which he could possibly have the BEF methodology to doing a web based attack, where the victim or the end user could actually be compromised by just actually having a MITMF spoof running. So, in this particular module we are going to talk about another type of a possible attack that could be attempted by the penetration tester in what is referred to as a DOS or a distributed DOS. So, DOS basically stands for a denial of service. With this particular kind of an attack, you will find that is not generally attempted by a penetration tester unless and until the tester has actually been given an explicit permission to do this kind of a testing, because this kind of an attack has the possibility for bringing down very important services of the network of the organization for which this tester is actually testing. Unless and until the penetration tester has actually been given an explicit permission for doing this testing, the DOS attack testing will generally not be done. And this basically differentiates between a real attacker from a penetration tester who is authorized, because the real hackers basically do not follow the rules, and also typically come in only with the objective of ensuring that at any cost the target system or the network has to be brought down without the awareness of the administrator or the end user, right. Whereas as a penetration tester, as we had seen initially as part of starting this particular IS4, this is something which is actually being given as a contract to find out what are all the possible loopholes that is actually existing in a particular network, for that to be getting plugged in before the real hacker actually tries to get inside the network, right. Having having discussed about the background of how this is actually differentiated between a real hacker and a penetration tester on the other side, we will have to look at what exactly is the denial of service, right. So, denial of service is basically a form of a negative impact on a target, where the sole objective is in some form or other the attacker basically will be actually bringing down the target in entirety, right. So, either the system itself will be brought down, shut down, or the system will be put in such a state like as if it is in a hung state, right. So, it might not be able to have any more resources to be allocated or whatever it is, but essentially that particular service basically gets attacked to the extent of it becoming a complete denial, and that is why this is basically referred to as a denial of service. Now, when this is denial of service, what exactly is a distributed denial of service, right. So, in a denial of service, you will typically have a mechanism by which the attacker will actually use only one system as the source from which he is launching the attack. But in a distributed denial of service, the attack will be more venomous, where the attack will not be actually initiated from a single machine, but it will actually be distributed across a range of machines, wherein it will be basically little difficult to sort of find out where is the source of the attack and sort of prevent it from happening. So, that is basically the difference between a denial of service and a distributed denial of service. Now, the most common denial of service attack that is actually attempted and very popular is what is referred to as a flooding of a target, right. Now, when we say flooding of a target, it could actually be in various forms, but essentially the idea here is that whatever is the specific resource that the attacker is trying to flood, the objective of the attacker is that that particular resource should be consumed to the maximum possible extent by his request alone, so that any kind of other legitimate request that is actually coming into the system, into that same server system, will not be it will not be in a position to get honored, right. So, as some examples which has been given here, DOS attacks could basically be targeting different kind of system resources, like I could basically sort of grab as much disk space as possible and store some junk data in it, or I could basically hog the bandwidth of that particular server which I am trying to target and because of that hogging of the bandwidth make that server inaccessible by other users of the network. The attacker could basically have the configuration information being modified in a very malicious manner, wherein for example certain type of route table entries could actually be removed, right. So, if I basically remove an entry in the route table, as we already know by now, we can very easily understand the impact that it can cause, because the packets for that particular entry that has been removed with that as the destination network, those packets are never going to be getting successfully delivered to the end user, right. Or I could basically have the attacker could basically have the state information modified in an incorrect manner, right, or anything of this particular sort that could that has the potential mechanism to harm that entire system and bring it down. So, if you see the different categories, there are typically 4 different categories: a volume based attack, a protocol attack, an application layer attack, and a complete session exhaustion. So, what we mean by a volume based attack is that as we will see in some few tools now, I could actually use a certain type of tools which with which I could basically generate a huge voluminous number of packets of a particular protocol or a particular template, and sort of inject it into the network and with the destination address marked as that particular target that the attacker is actually trying to bring down. So, that is basically a volume based attack. A protocol attack could basically be something related with the protocol internals mostly, where the attacker will basically try to have will have an understanding of the entire protocol working, and then try to make use of one particular limitation or a vulnerability in the protocol for doing an attack, right. So, an example that has actually been mentioned here is the SYNFLET. So, if you recall, we had talked about TCP protocol in our earlier IS3 course, where we have discussed about something called as a TCP SYN segment that is used as part of the initial connection establishment, right. So, the SYN-FLED situation is will be exploited by the attacker by trying to send lot of initial connection requests which will generate a TCP SYN segment and send it to the target system, but the attacker will deliberately refuse to do the final acknowledgement, because of which after a point in time the target system is not going to have any more buffer space available in it to actually honor a very valid legitimate SYN request that is coming in for a new connection establishment, right. So, this is an example of a protocol based attack where the attacker basically exploits a vulnerability or a limitation that is known in a particular protocol. So, an application layer attack is basically like the attacker will basically try to generate traffic that apparently looks very legitimate, but because of the kind of volume of the traffic that has actually been generated, the attacker the target system will basically be successfully brought down by the attacker, right. And also this has got the possibility of exploiting the vulnerability. So, if you remember, we actually had talked about some example of exploits before, where we saw that one moment we know what is the operating system, what kind of applications are running on that particular operating system on the target currently, using things like Metasploit and having a preset kind of exploits, we could actually exploit that vulnerability on that server and then sort of bring it down, or at least bring that particular service down, right. So, we had actually looked at the Samba exploit as a vulnerability on one example that we had seen with the previous with one of the tools that we discussed in the previous session, right. And the last possible category for the DOS is what is referred to as a session exhaustion, where the attacker will basically try to have the limitations or the number of sessions that that particular server or that node has the capability to handle at any point in time, and sort of try to abuse it by trying to generate that many number of session requests to that particular server without actually having an intention of really consuming those session based resources at actually speaking, right. So, in this case what will actually happen is that subsequently if a legitimate request is actually coming in from a valid user for opening up a session with that particular server, that server is not going to actually have enough resources available at its disposal to hand over that particular session initiation successfully, right. So, these are the different kinds of DOS or a DDoS attack that an attacker could possibly make use of. So, if you look at Kali Linux, there are actually different modules that are actually available. So, depending on what version of Kali Linux you are installing, there is a possibility that all the DOS and DDoS modules could actually be available in this particular location user slash share slash Metasploit framework slash modules slash auxiliary slash DOS, or there is also possibility in if you actually have any other Kali Linux version, this particular location could actually be different also, right. So, we might have to do a search on where the DOS subdirectory is present, and under that particular subdirectory we find that there will be different kind of attacks possible depending on what we want to do. So, all these are basically directories that is there. So, for example, if I want to basically do an attack on Samba, then I could actually have typically a Python or a Perl based exploit scripts available inside this, which could be used by the attacker to sort of do a DOS or a DDoS attack on this particular target, which actually has a Samba service running possibly, right. So, coming down to some tools, UDP Floodder is some very simple tool. It basically tries to flood generate UDP packets and flood a particular target that has actually been given. So, you specify the IP address, port number, how many packets and what sockets, and then say flood. It will basically go and try to flood that particular target with this many number of packets that you have actually asked it to generate and send. Since most of the gaming softwares available on the internet is all based on UDP, so using this any kind of a gaming server could actually be brought down in the network. So, this is something which you could potentially download from SourceForge. So, another tool is something called as a RUDY. So, RUDY basically stands for RUDY, right. So, RUDY, and it basically takes a slightly different approach to doing a denial of service attack on the websites. So, it basically the way it actually works is that it sort of enables a user to select a form from the web app and then use that form to send a flood of post request to that particular website, right. This flooding of the post request beyond a particular level will obviously ensure that the web server which is actually handling this particular supposed to handle this particular request and respond back is going to be getting hit with lack of resources once the threshold number crosses, right. So, this is a different way of actually doing a denial of service attack, where first a legitimate request like a HTTP post request is sent, and using that I could basically have this particular tool capture the data from that and then give that data as an input into this particular tool and then generate many thousands of possible post requests to be sent to that particular website at the same instant of time, and this could possibly be making that server come down without being able to handle all these requests at the same instant of time. So, another tool that one could actually download and then make use of as a DOS tool is called Pylorus. So, Pylorus is again another denial of service tool, where it basically asks the user to construct a customized or their own unique HTTP request header, right. So, and then it basically tries to open up the TCP connections and sort of inject these generated request headers inside that, because at a particular time after a particular point in time when the entire connection queue is sort of exhausted with all these generated customized HTTP headers, it is no more going to have any resource available for accepting any kind of a legitimate connection, right. So, any kind of request that the other users in the net or in the internet are basically trying to send to this particular server, they are going to be refused service of their connection request, even though it is actually valid and legitimate, because of the fact that that particular server is already having no more resources available. So, this could be one scenario where we generally have the HTTP protocol respond back with a message saying that the server or the device is actually busy. Whereas in this particular case, when somebody has used this kind of a tool, it would not be actually busy, but it does not have the necessary resources in terms of memory buffers or whatever it is to actually handle this legitimate request, because there has been lot of invalid connection request with proprietary or customized HTTP headers in each of those connection requests that has been sent to that particular server at the same instant of time. So, this again is something which is available in SourceForge, which could be customized and then tried as a DOS tool by the attacker. Thank you.